Okay, welcome to the last presentation for this session. We will be discussing pathways for country-level, blockchain-driven, federated digital twins of social housing. So it's a presentation which really follows more of a social science aspects of blockchain in construction rather than a purely technical kind of idea. Most of the research has been conducted on the ground by my co-authors, Jonathan Scott and Magdalena Blazusiak from Robert Gordon University. And we wrote the paper together in terms of presenting it here. The project, the underlying project, is actually not a digital twin, and we'll be discussing the difference between a database and a twin, and what would be the kind of discussion. There was also discussion with Mohammed Qasim in the session about digital twins yesterday in this room on what is a digital twin and how could we define it, and it was interesting to see that a lot of the authors of the papers were disagreeing with each other and were kind of struggling to find a pertinent kind of discussion. So I'll mention here what our difference is with our actual stakeholders. So this project was commissioned by the Construction Leadership Forum, so that's an industry-driven forum in Scotland, and it is really related to the legislation and the collective effort in Scotland to arrive at, as a country, at a net zero by 2045. And the challenge starts with, what if we had this national database, or what we researchers would call more of a national digital twin of existing buildings, so that we could actually build collaboration of stakeholders to develop a holistic Scotland-wide approach to reduce energy demand and decarbonize the energy source for property. And the two main kind of broad activities here lie on decarbonizing energy sources, right? So electrifying energy sources for buildings, but also reducing energy demand, so retrofit and being able to upgrade existing portfolio. We do agree with our stakeholders that we need a universal platform, but in terms of the data capture of the public sector property portfolios, we not only need a database, as our stakeholders would actually declare, but more of a digital twin. So we need essentially the conclusion or closing of the loop between the digital asset and the physical asset in live format. And essentially the research was, how do we go on about creating that pathway to build this platform that tracks existing buildings and their decarbonization? And how do we graduate that to a national federated digital twin? And I'll explain how, during the presentation, how the use of blockchain and federation actually works on that level, or should work in the future. In terms of methods, right, this was a series of workshops that we held with about 60 people representing the Scottish Government, local authorities, so councils, the Scottish Future Trust, which is an operational arm of the Scottish Government in terms of defining the future of the country, the Health and Safety Executive of the Scottish Government, housing associations, and various other large building portfolio owners of public buildings. So we held a series of workshops with our stakeholders to determine essentially what would be the parameters, what would be the best parameters, data, and ways of changing that platform forward. And by that, we then ended up with a pilot digital twin framework, out of which we kind of took out the operational parameters, taking into account the existing data and databases that exist all over the country in a very fragmented and distributed format. And then that fed into a survey that was given back to academics, planning departments, and building standards agency to understand whether we had kind of like the right picture. And from that, we kind of distilled, in a sense, the framework presented here. And we identify essentially at the building level, 3 levels. What my colleague Jonathan Scott calls a house MOT, right? So for those of you not living in the UK, MOT stands for Ministry of Transport. And it's essentially the basic check that happens to a car every year, right? To see whether it's drivable. So essentially the basic data would be a package of information about a building that gives us the basic idea of is the building performing according to what we need. And then during specific triggers in the life cycle, you would be able then to upgrade the data packets into more detailed data and kind of graduating to a house passport. And then through a mechanism of evaluation, actually then including also context data moving forward, including, for example, occupant behavior, changes in the context, and so on and so forth, really going on live data and dynamic data that drive the picture of a digital twin. And that would give you a location-specific evaluation and drive towards a house retrofit plan that would upgrade the particular property. Obviously, the question is what kind of data should be included, right? That was one of the questions we started with our stakeholders, and I can safely say that, statistically speaking, everybody wants everything as much as they want. So I won't go too much into the details on that level. There was a level of discussing what details data should be included, and this goes from fabric data, performance in terms of energy, structural information, services and MEP, right? And then depending on your discipline, you might include orientation, form factor, but then also number of occupants, vulnerability of those occupants, occupancy pattern, and so on and so forth. And some of them make sense in terms of the single building, and some others make sense as an aggregate information out of a cluster of buildings. And I think the interesting bit here is that the data on the detail didn't only focus on the building itself, but also on the occupants and what the occupants did to kind of establish where do you have energy use during the life cycle, and not assuming that just through building archetypes or simulations. And another question was, where should this platform be managed, right? And most participants actually discussed over government provided centrally based data management system, essentially because the actual planning and building permitting framework currently in Scotland is very decentralized, right? So every city council is running their own system, and that causes deep trouble on coordination between them sometimes. But others, a minority in the whole discussion, actually also wanted a locally based data management system, so much more locally controlled and adapted to the local conditions. And that gives us a very different idea of what the benefits would be. And those stakeholders would actually argue for a much more fine-tuned and fine-grained understanding of local conditions, right? So arguing for a city council actually doing that as a city twin or as a council twin, so that they would be able to adapt and configure that. And then we would also have ideas about clusters of councils or clusters of building portfolio owners running their own twins, essentially. So it gives us an idea that the most desirable kind of idea is one single source of a platform, but at the same time, a lot of the stakeholders needed a much more customizable and configurable control of how the platform operates. And then we have a question in terms of should the data be available to all, more so in the discussion of if the data contained there also includes human occupancy and human behavior, and would there be any kind of risk of, if you make all that available to all, of going foul with the GDPR and allowing potentially vulnerable people to be exploited. So one of the issues that was mentioned was that old people or disabled people might be subject to scams with someone being able to exploit their profile from that point of view. The responses here were oscillating between full availability, but most of the participants actually chose various filtering options, from allowing specific data owners to upgrade or access the data, or following particular verification processes, and yes, having the platform available to most professionals, but having to go through a process of verification and control of what you access before being allowed to do so. and so on and so forth. I'll just go a little bit faster. So the idea there is, out of all of the interviews and workshops and the survey, essentially what emerges is that we would look at the framework we were trying to build more as a common pool resource problem. And there are researchers in the room like Jens who have framed this for other type of project management, not for digital twin, but we think there are similarities in terms of looking at this as a commons problem. And essentially you are looking at a platform that needs to be updated by a lot of people during the process of retrofitting. You're looking at a platform that would be only sustainable if everybody is incentivized to participate, but also where you have very clear rules against rivalrous consumption, right? So you might not end up with a platform where certain categories of professionals provide data and others only consume. And then also the possibility that housing associations and city councils would be able to organize part of the platform or customize it to their own liking, essentially. There's a lot of discussion here in terms of how each of those points of common pool resources and Austrian principles kind of have a blockchain, essentially, response, and that's how we started looking at blockchain as one of the potential technologies, enabling technologies to, yes, provide a platform that is single, but at the same time takes advantage of decentralization in the implementation. I'm going to skip this as it's a bit boring, but I'll go back to the key kind of affordances that blockchain offered or offers if we go through with it, which is trust and transparency, automated enforcements, right? So we can be consistent in applying these Austrian principles. It provides scalable governance, so it allows both a wide, national-wide application, but also the development of nested blockchain architecture in the local level. And then obviously incentive alignment. So we believe that we can map incentives in terms of participation and funding within the whole platform. So out of this, we started looking at a data coordination layer, trust and security mechanisms, and then incentive structures as key points that would then drive the digital twin implementation in terms of the details, and essentially ending up with a very, we would say, novel framework on how we can combine supply chain of skills and materials, skills and training, so that the platform actually achieves its goal, the decentralized application of computational processes and data repositories, the idea that we can advance beyond building archetypes with simulation and allow that to go closer to governance of the whole platform. Obviously, a visualization and interface that allows us to communicate this much more effectively. And key under this is an economy and funding interface, right? So we're looking at a collective treasury and what we call a retrofit coin, that's still to be defined in its details, with blockchain infrastructure as a kind of underlying enabling technology. And the whole driver around this is that we're looking at economic and employment benefits, right? So the connection of putting the data platform very close to the funding and the skills and retraining would essentially reinvigorate parts of the Scottish economy in terms of retrofit. It would be also a very nice example of public and private collaboration, because you don't need to kind of petition the government to build the platform. You can have private data providers providing parts of it, while still maintaining a public aligned structure, a public benefit applying structure. You have social and community impacts. A lot of the building stock in Scotland is very old, and the idea that you might, there's a concept of fuel poverty, so people get cold, and this has a really health impact. So allowing to have a secure and warm house is a great driver of health. And then obviously the kind of grand idea behind it is supporting the country's goal of net zero by 2045. And I'll close here with any questions you might have on this. Thank you so much.